Whoa, 6 kids? 7? 8? That's the least we've ever had up here, I think. Come on in, you can sit on there, or there's usually lots of room on the floor, but today we don't even need the floor. Here they come. Well, good morning, children.
Good morning.
Our children are all at camp, so I left them there and quickly came over here. You girls can sit on the bench right beside this girl if you want. A lot of different faces I'm not familiar with. So I've been talking through the Old Testament. We started in Genesis, creation, and slowly over the last couple years we've been making our way through, and we went through all the kings. Remember that? David and Goliath, and Saul before him, and Solomon after him, and then Rehoboam and Jeroboam and all the other Boams. And they get destroyed time after time. They do that which was good for a little while, and then they do that which was evil in the sight of the Lord over and over and over again. Remember that? And then I told you last time that if you were to read the whole story, this is over here is 1st and 2nd Chronicles and 1st and 2nd Kings. That's where the Bible talks about the kings. But if you want to know what the prophets said during those times, who knows where you should read? Any ideas?
Acts.
Not Acts.
The New Testament.
No, New Testament is after. Psalms is part of it. David wrote a lot of the Psalms, but even something else. Who knows who the prophets are? Who are the prophets? We talked about one of the prophets quite a lot. What was his name? Elijah, and then he had a predecessor whose name was Elisha, but they didn't have books. Elijah and Elisha don't write books, but there's other prophets that came. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joel, Ezekiel, all these men, they come sent by God. They come to the people of God to warn them of their sin and of the destruction that's coming upon Israel. Because it seems like that's always what God needed to tell the people. They just were constantly disobeying. And they went again and again and again. They came and they told the people, you've got to stop doing this. You've got to repent. You've got to do things differently. You've got to turn back to your God. And they didn't listen, and they didn't listen, and they didn't listen. And then finally, Jeremiah comes. They call him the weeping prophet. Apparently, he preached for some 40 years, I think, if I remember correctly, 45 maybe. And nobody ever turned back to God. He preached and he preached and he preached and he said, repent, change your mind, stop going that way. And he did some really wild stuff to try to get the attention of the people, and nobody listened. Can you imagine being a preacher like that? Last weekend I was preaching to a group of young people at a youth camp, and I told them that some of the hardest things to do for a preacher is to take young people who are in the prime of their life, who have everything in front of them, and it looks like life is good, and try to tell them life is not good and you're going in a bad direction. Because it doesn't feel like it. It all feels good and right? You guys are in the same boat. Everything feels good and right. But he preached to them for 40 years and they never listened. It'd be hard to preach for that long and not have people listen. But one of the things that he said was that there's going to come a king named Cyrus who's going to let the people go. Let the people go from where? Do you remember? Right at the end of the 2nd Chronicles, a king comes in. Not Egypt. That was before under Moses. A king comes in and he takes the people captive. It was a good try. Who takes the people captive and takes them back to a city called Babylon? Nebuchadnezzar. We like Nebuchadnezzar because he leads us to the story of Daniel. Now I know Billy and Neil, I think both told the story of Daniel in the last couple years, but that's the part we're at, and it's a good story. I like it. It's a really good name too, isn't it? Daniel? Don't you think? Remember you make the connection? That's my name. Did you know that? My name is Dan, but Daniel is the full name. So in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. Who knows what a besieging is?
Kind of like a raid.
Kind of like a raid. They perhaps surrounded the whole city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem. They probably went all around, had soldiers every which direction. So the people in Israel, in Jerusalem, are trying to think of how to escape, and they find no way to get out. They could climb over the walls, but there's a bunch of soldiers there. They could try to rush out with as big of army as they could possibly have, but then they'd be surrounded from behind very quickly. And now the whole city is in danger of being burned down. Nebuchadnezzar besieged the city of Jerusalem. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. So is King Nebuchadnezzar a godly man from the story that you remember? He's not, is he? Who gave Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand? What does it say? Who gave the children of Israel into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar? It says in chapter 2, and what does it say?
Lord.
The Lord. The Lord gave the children of Israel into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Is going into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar a good thing or a bad thing? It's not good, right? That means Israel is going to be destroyed. They're going to be scattered all over the place, and they're going to be put into captivity, maybe made slaves in Babylon. We know Daniel becomes a slave. He becomes a very rich and well-to-do slave, but a slave nonetheless. And he never gets to get married. He never gets to have children. He never gets to have a wife. And he's being brought as a slave, so it doesn't seem like a good thing. But when God is sick and tired of people doing evil and not repenting and walking in unrighteousness, then God sometimes gives them over to a reprobate mind or to captivity. Here, God gave them to Nebuchadnezzar, and God's going to use Nebuchadnezzar in many different ways. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Now that's a very strange statement, don't you think? Did you catch it? So Nebuchadnezzar went into Jerusalem and took the temple. The temple is where they worshiped God. Remember the temple that not Solomon built, but another, this would still be the one that Solomon built, I think. He went into that temple and took out the instruments that they used to worship Jehovah God. And God gave Jehoiakim to Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar took God's stuff and brought it into a different little g God's temple. Can you imagine that? Maybe the Ark of the Covenant or the table of showbread or that candlestick that they made. They brought it all into a different God's temple, a little g God, not even a real God, just a God that people made up. So that's how destroyed Israel is. Jerusalem is no more, the temple is gone, all the goods that were in the temple are taken out and put into a strange God's temple. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and the king's seed and of the princes. A eunuch is someone who never becomes a married man. He lives his whole life for one purpose, not for wife, not for children, only to serve, to serve, to serve, to serve. Sometimes today people want to stay single just to have fun and have fun. That's improper. If you're going to stay single, you should serve. That's my understanding. That's my opinion. I think if you're going to stay single for a long time, you should serve God. If not, you should serve someone else and get married, right? I should serve my wife should serve me, and we should serve our children should serve us, and it's just this beautiful life of service. But these people, eunuchs, were serving the king. They served Nebuchadnezzar. And he says, Captain of my eunuchs, I want you to take the best of Israel's people, all the young men that are coming out of Israel, take the ones that look the best, maybe that look the strongest. Maybe you can test them on some skills to see what they're capable of, how much knowledge they have. I want the very best ones, and I want you to make them eunuchs and bring them into this palace, and we're going to train them in the ways of Babylon. Children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, whom they might teach the learning in the tongue of the Chaldeans. Now, I'm going to ask a little bit of a vanity question. If you guys were to be taken captive into Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, would he come around and look at any of you and say, I want this one, take this one to my... I wouldn't want to be chosen for that, but at the same time, I'd want to have the abilities to want to be chosen for that, right? That's a bit of a conundrum. I want to be wise and smart and knowledgeable and have studied science and language and all that, but if I do, then they're going to choose me to do hard things, and then maybe I don't want to do that. You know, people have that problem still today. There's a saying that my parents used to say in German, the less you know, the less you'll be held accountable for. I can't remember exactly how to say it in German. Maybe somebody else remembers. That's not a very good way to live. If you don't know something, but you know that you should know something, then you're already guilty, aren't you? You should know it. And so Daniel was one of the ones, and his three friends, they knew a lot of stuff. And so they were immediately chosen to be among the king's eunuchs. They were without blemish, meaning they were probably very handsome, but they were still young. And maybe had big, broad shoulders, looked like they could lift some weight maybe, and they could run for a while. They could also do science. They were very smart. They could do math. They could speak maybe a couple different languages. Who would be picked? I wouldn't be picked probably by the king. He would probably let me go and do some other kind of service, which maybe I'd be grateful for. But Daniel was one of those. The king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. This was the king's idea. For 3 years, I'm going to take the best of all the people that I have taken captive. I'm going to steal all the young men that I want, and I'm going to feed them the very best nutritious food that I can give them. The best meats, the best of everything, and even wine from my own table. And King Nebuchadnezzar had the best food in the world. He had the finest chefs. He could make any kind of great food that you could think of. All the stuff that you would always want your mom to make, he could make that every day. And they always had good foods. And so he said, give these men all the best foods. Now there was one little trick, I think, is what was taking place. Remember, he has strange gods that he worships, right? And so I think any animal that he took, he would offer it in sacrifice to these strange gods, and then offer it to his people to eat, thinking that it's been blessed by this God, right? If you take this meat and it's already good and healthy and nutritious, and then offer it to a God that's good, then maybe you'll even get some spiritual benefit from this food. Well, this is where Daniel had some problems, right? Now, verse 6. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel. Who knows the rest of the names without reading? I always forget these ones. Who knows the 3 names of Daniel's friends? Anybody? They're tough names, aren't they? Hananiah. Do you remember? No. Mishael and Azariah. Those are good names to remember because those are very brave, strong, ambitious 4 young men. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. Now he's going to give them Babylonian names or maybe Chaldean names. And he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar. How would you like to go from Daniel to Belteshazzar? I like the name Daniel or Dan. Is pretty much fine by me. I'd rather not be called Belt. Right? That would be weird. Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. And now, if you've been paying attention to Bible stories at all, you'll know that those are 3 very familiar names, aren't they? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's a fun story. We're going to get to that in the coming weeks and months. But Daniel, I think Daniel was the leader of those 3 boys. Maybe there was a bunch of Jews there that wanted to just fit in and did whatever the king said. But Daniel was taught by his parents to serve God only. Maybe they were the one good family left in Israel, or maybe they were going down the wrong path, and when they got taken captive, maybe Daniel, in his young mind, he said to himself, I'm going to stop serving myself. I'm going to stop serving strange gods. I'm going to start serving the Lord God. I don't know what happened, but Daniel here seems like he's determined to do the right thing. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. You see how much involved God is in this story? The children of Israel are doing that which is evil in the sight of God, so God gives them to Nebuchadnezzar. But God doesn't just take the children of Israel and squash them. He doesn't just make them servants and then say, done with you. He immediately raises up Daniel. And not only does he raise up Daniel, but he gives Daniel favor in the sight of the prince of the eunuchs. The leader of the eunuchs loves Daniel. Maybe he spent a few weeks with him and he has seen Daniel is cheerful and happy and obedient. You know, the Bible never ever has anything bad to say about Daniel. There's no sin found in Daniel. Now, we believe he was a man. He must have sinned somewhere along the way. But there's no mistakes found in the book of Daniel by Daniel. Even his people, the people that were around him later on, they tried to find some fault in Daniel, and they couldn't find it. So Daniel is a very good young man. And so he purposed not to do this, and he won the favor of the prince of the eunuchs, and now the prince of the eunuch is really wondering if he should let Daniel not eat the king's meat. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, verse 10, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head and the king to the king. I feel like I just told this story. Maybe I actually went through this chapter last time. Doesn't hurt to refresh it, right? Daniel, the prince of the eunuchs, said, if I don't give you the right meat and you don't eat enough meat, you might start looking skinny. And then guess what happens? I lose my head. I don't want to lose my head. I kind of like my head, the eunuch said. And he says, I don't want to lose it. So if I give you the wrong meat, the wrong food, if I don't give you the king's meat, you might not be able to think clearly. You might not be able to stay strong and healthy, and things won't go well for you. And then things won't go well for me. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. So this was what Daniel's plan was. Not only had he won favor with the prince of the eunuchs, but the prince of the eunuchs had put another man over them, and he had won that man's favor too. His name was Melzar, and Melzar is taking a chance. The prince of the eunuchs doesn't dare not give Daniel the meat and the wine, but Melzar is going to take a chance. He's putting his life on the line. He knows if things don't go well in these 10 days, things will not go well for him. He's going to lose his life, at least his job for sure. He says, let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat the portion of the king's meat, as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. So for 10 days, all they had was pulse to eat. Now that's a word we don't use anymore. Pulse is a word for vegetables, probably fruits and vegetables, maybe some nuts, things that grow naturally on trees, things that people wouldn't think to offer up to their gods. There's no blood in them. They don't cut the throats of these things and offer it to their strange gods. Daniel said, I don't want to be defiled. All I'm going to eat is pulse. Just fresh fruits and veggies. And I'm sure he was given good stuff. And after 10 days, at the end of their 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Somehow they had more clarity of mind. They could think more clearly. And their face became fuller and richer. I know a woman once that she came to our house back in the day. She had really bad cancer. And she went on a complete carrot juice fast. For like a month, all she drank was carrot juice. You know, her skin actually started looking orange. Her face was kind of like a dark brown, orangey color. But she cured herself of cancer. It was totally gone. She was sitting in our kitchen telling us the story, and she had orange skin. It looked very strange. So Daniel, after 10 days of eating pulse, meat, not eating any of the king's meat, his skin looked healthy. It looked radiant. It looked very, plump and rich. Maybe they would come by and squeeze the cheeks. On a puppy, when we have puppies, we pinch the back of their neck. And if it stays up, the skin stays up, then they're dehydrated. And that's not good. If they're a little bit sick and you pinch their skin, sometimes they can tell just by looking, or the way they do it with horses, they'll open up their mouth and look inside at their teeth and see how things are looking, right? And so every day, somebody would come along, or maybe every week, and examine these young boys. Have they lost muscle strength? Maybe they would even measure. Sometimes boys that are 16 or 18, they start measuring their arms to see how big their biceps are. And so they would come along, maybe measure their biceps and think, he lost a quarter inch. That's not good. He's getting weaker. Or if they were a little bit chunky before, maybe they need to lose a little bit and get a little bit smaller. But Daniel and his friends, they ended up looking healthier and better after 10 days. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, God's mixed in here again. God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So after 10 days, they could already tell these boys are studious. They are working hard. They are learning a lot. They are smarter and wiser than all the other boys. They pay attention. like you guys are paying attention. They listen. They do what they're told. And they're learning very quickly. They seem like they just have a knack for it. They're picking it up like it's nothing. God was giving them understanding. Now, at the end of the days, the king had said he should bring them in. Then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 19. And the king communed with them. Imagine that. You're a young servant boy, probably missing your parents and your family, but you purpose, I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to serve God, even though everything looks miserable. I'm going to do the right thing. And now, a couple weeks goes by, and you're learning from the king's own tutors and his professors and teachers. And there you are learning all the wise things that the king has to say and to teach, and all the wise men have to teach. And then you get brought in before the king of Babylon, the strongest, most powerful man in the world at the time. And the king communed with them. And among them all was found none like Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better. Isn't that something? 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Remember, before I mentioned Jeremiah prophesied of a king named Cyrus, right? Nebuchadnezzar eventually loses his kingdom, and then that kingdom gets lost to Cyrus. And Daniel is going to be there still during the time of Cyrus, and Cyrus will be the one that will let the people go back after 70 years in captivity. And that's where we get the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra was a prophet and a priest, and Nehemiah leads the people back to build the wall and to build the temple again and all that kind of good stuff. I hope you're starting to see how the story all flows together. And all of it was written so that we can learn about who God is and about who Jesus is. Jesus is also a sinless man, right? Just like Daniel seems to be. Daniel was thrown later on into a lion's den and left for dead. And the next day he kind of rises from the grave, right? Just like Jesus did. So there's so many things we can learn about who God is and who Jesus is from these stories. So next time we'll start back up in chapter 2. And I think I maybe have done chapter 1 twice now. You guys should remember it very well, right? What's the 3 names of the boys? Daniel? Anybody? Even if it's just the Babylonian names. The 3 boys, Shadrach and Abednego. Now, anybody for some bonus points? Anybody remember any of the Hebrew names? Any boys and girls out there? Ezekiel. Not Ezekiel. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Next time, Savannah will be teaching you. No? All right, let's go back to our seats.